This will probably be the most important video for you to understand of all the tour videos because we're going to be talking about signal flow, containers, and modulation, how Bitwig handles these things. And this is really where I guess every DAW is pretty unique in how it goes about this. So we'll just go through a few examples. We'll start with the really bare bones basics, which is what happens with audio clips and how those are broken down. So if we just go in here and we grab some kind of a loop here, you can see that this has a 128 BPM. We're at 77, so it's going to be aggressively stretching this. So we'll go ahead and just maybe make a few adjustments. And that sounds fine. So at the very beginning, when there's nothing in here, it's just, the Bitwig is just a shell. It's completely empty. It's ready for you to fill with things. And it begins with, in our case, an audio track. Here you can see our audio track and some of the options that we have. Not a whole lot of options. We can change the volume. We can change the panning if we want to do that at the track level. From there, we created a clip, and I can create another clip. And inside of this clip, we have the ability to basically do things like change the color, adjust the length. We could loop this, even though there's nothing inside of it. We can add fades at this level here, and adjust the scaling of those fades, the curves. Change the shape, but there's really nothing that's going to be playing back. This is just a blank and empty shell, another shell that is going to hold what Bitwig Studio calls events. So when I click on this, we're holding one event inside of one clip. It snaps to the size of that clip, all super tidy, super easy to go. And from the event, that's where we really do have the options to mess around and do things. You saw me changing the stretch mode. You saw me changing the volume on the clip. Very different to changing the volume at this level. We don't see that waveform display changing in any way, but at the event level, it does change, right? We can see that it gets smaller or it gets larger depending on what it is we're doing. And if we want to go a step further, we can double click, and now we can actually get into this event. So we're still right now, if I just click here, this is at the clip level, but once I click inside here, we now get to the event level where we have a variety of options that we can select and choose, some of which are different from the clip level. And right now, if I drag this out, we're going to see that it loops if I do it at the bottom or at the top. All right, and that's because it's assuming that we just want our one event tied to the clip. That's how probably 85% of the time you're going to do things. However, we could also go in here and consolidate this, which you're going to have to do a lot of times if you're trying to get a reverb tail or something. If you were to go in and like, let's say, bounce this, right? Like we have a bounce. If you have a reverb on here, it's only going to bounce the size of the clip. So having this longer will allow you to get the tail. That's a story for another time. But now what this would allow me to do is to actually go in, and let's say this was even a little bit longer. We could take some other kind of track, and we could bring that in. So now inside of this clip, we have two different events, and these events are kind of operating independently of one another with our settings that we were to set up there from the event menu. We could use totally different stretch modes, all that sort of stuff. Just important to note that that's kind of how that's working, but we'll go ahead and bring this back down for now. And what I want to do is kind of go in here and like split this at the onsets. So what that's going to do is it's going to create a bunch of events, but they're all still going to be housed inside of the same clip. So I right click, split at onsets. We can now see that if I select all of these, we have 24 different events. And now the great part about Bitwig is with these events, we can kind of randomize some of the stuff that's going on. First things first, I could take all of these guys and I could add auto fades, those little 0.004 fades at the beginning and end of each of these in case there's any clicks or there's any pops. Don't forget that at the clip level, we also could add an auto fade, but that would only be applying to the clip itself, right? If I go in and I add a fade, that's generic to the entire clip. And so if this was much longer, as it was before, we'd see that if we add the fade out, it's not even really having any impact at that point, right? Pretty basic and easy to understand. But what I like about Bitwig is that we could go in here now and we could take all these, for example, and we'll go and look at the gain, and I could go into gain and we could like throw in some spread, throw in some chaos here. And that's when spread's going to matter. Bring the volume down generically, bring everybody a little bit closer, add a little more chaos, bring everybody a little bit closer, and now we could listen to what that's done. Very basic, right? Maybe we want to take one of these guys and like reverse it. Reverse that one. We'll reverse that one, and we'll just keep this guy playing back, and I'm going to probably also mess around with the pan position of all these different events. Or I can just select some specific ones. See what we've done there. We wouldn't just have to stop at that. We could also add slides in too. So let's go to the pitch. And in this one, we'll add like a slide. Pretty cool, right? Things like that we can do. And if we hit Option, we can change the shape of these. Pretty cool, pretty cool, pretty cool. Okay, so that is kind of the basics at the audio level. And don't forget that if you wanted to kind of bring all of these events back together, we'd actually have to bounce it. And then we could, again, go in and kind of chop it up and do things and mess around with it. So just some options there for you to look at and to explore on your own. But a lot of fun, pretty cool stuff, to say the least. I've brought this clip back in more of a default state so that we can look at automation. And this is where, depending on the view that you're working in, automation does kind of function a little bit differently. It's a little bit glitchy working with clip automation on the track level. So we're not going to do too much of that because sometimes it kind of does what you think it's going to do and other times it doesn't. It's probably easier to explain it from the clip view, but like let's say I take this guy and I bring it in here and we play it back from here. Let's go and add an effect. So clearly this is going to make a big difference on the sound. What I can do is I can double click here. And again, this is from the clip level. If I bring up automation, you can see we have the ability to apply some like clip automation to this guy. And let's just get rid of the arrangement view for the sake of it. So let's go in here and just kind of dip this in and dip this out. And now when we listen to it, every time this plays over and over again, it's going to keep that automation. And if I was to then like record to the timeline, for example, we'll see that automation gets drawn in. And when it goes around, it's going to record it again. Right? We can see that like so, and you can see that it's following that. It's going to follow that over and over again. But when we get to the actual like timeline here, we can separate it out so that the automation is no longer tied to the clip and instead that it's specifically tied to the track itself, which would be more or less going in here and taking the comb and just kind of doing an automation move like this so that as we loop this over and over again, that automation is not applied or it's not going to be repeating over and over. Instead, we have control of it here. So what usually ends up happening is if you want to have automation tied to the clip, work in clip view until you're done with that. Then you can bring it in, you can duplicate it, play it over and over again, whatever. And then at the end, if you need to change something, you'll just do that from the track view because there are some like weird behavioral things where if you try to use clip automation, then you drag it out. Sometimes it doesn't always follow or sometimes it does or it messes it up. It's a very sort of, I don't know if they have that worked out completely, but it's given me a lot of problems in the past. So I thought I would just show that to you here of how you work with automation. I guess I should also just talk about like automation in general. Like, for example, if I want to adjust feedback, I'm just doing this so I can show you these things or play with the frequency here. Whatever. You can see right now we can only see one lane of automation. When we click this down, we have the ability to look at all the different things that have been automated. We could also like pin something here so that if I go and I try to click on other settings, it stays set there on frequency versus if I go and I'm clicking around, it will adjust. But I could also just go and have it show like all lanes of automation, or I can go in here and like add additional lanes or one additional lane. But what I usually like to do is show everything that has been automated up until this point, and then you can kind of go in and adjust those guys on the fly. And you can see here that we have comb being pinned to the top. If it's not pinned to the top, then whatever we select is going to jump up there. So if you have different effects, this will make a little bit more sense to you. But you can see all those guys then moving independently, and they're all doing it very kind of slowly. So there you go, kind of just a very basic look at how the automation works and the difference between track and clip automation. In clip automation, you saw that you have like a lot of different options if you want to exploit those in here with automation type. And this is where it gets interesting with how the looping and stuff works. I'll try to maybe do an example of it. Okay, so we have this guy dragged out. Let's see if I can do what I want to do here. We'll go into the edit view really quick. Oh, my fault. I took off the effect that we had on there. So we'll just bring it back on. And we'll see if I can do one example of this so you can see how it works. These are some of the things that's useful to see somebody do it, just so you have a better idea. All right, so good. So you can see right now, with the loop turned on, it is repeating it over and over again. But what happens if I add automation outside of this range? I'll do something like that. I can get really creative and turn this to free. And now when I extend the clip, you can see how it made a huge adjustment to that and how it was working. But let's say that instead I want this to have this automation loop stop at 7. Now when I change it, it's extending, and so it's not always going to fall at the same point, or at least it shouldn't be necessarily in relationship to where we are at in the waveform. Because the clip itself is still just 4 bars, but the automation range is now going to be 7. Okay, or something like that. So we'll bring this back actually to 7 if I can. And I adjust some things as you just saw. So you can do some really creative stuff with it. You can also adjust some of the way that things are moving. This is going to cause some interesting variations on things. In this one, we could have just operating at 5. But again, this is where I'd probably have you consult the manual to really understand everything that's going on. I don't really even understand these things. I don't really use them, to be honest with you. But you can get some interesting variation out of it if you so choose. All right, now is where we finally get to have some fun and go really deep with this. So as I mentioned before, our audio tracks, they're containers. If we have note tracks, that's going to be a container as well. And you have different options and ways that you can edit MIDI versus ways that you can edit audio. I'll kind of leave that up to you because this series is getting way too long already. But let's go in here and let's grab some kind of a pad. Doesn't matter what it is. True circles. What's that? That's fine. And I'm just going to go ahead and loop this guy. Turn it down a little bit. And now when we go out to the browser or we bring up the browser, either way, you're going to see that we have a lot of different options based on categories. Okay, so we'll go and grab these categories. And I want to start by clicking on container. So some of the really basic ones here are things like multiband effects, mid-side split. That's going to do exactly what you think it's going to do. If I bring in the multiband effects here, we have our crossover frequencies. We can mute these, or we can also apply unique effects into each of these. So let's say just on, we'll use actually the 2-band. This would be maybe more realistic. And I'm gonna bring the pitch down. watch me do all these things we were just talking about as well. Just make sure this kind of works. Yeah. Okay, that's fine. So here we go. I can go ahead and mute the highs. Let's bring this down lower. So in this case, I'd probably want to mono this out, not have it in stereo. So I could go in here and I could grab the tool. I could mono that guy out, bring back in our highs. And now maybe on the high end, I want to add like a delay or I want to add a reverb. Have it not affect anything going on down low. Okay. Very cool. Now, we'll take this a step further and talk a little bit about how modulation is going to work. So modulation really does exist from like left to right, so to speak. Meaning that if I put something into a modulation slot here in the multiband effects, it could control feasibly anything to the right of it. So if I was in low, it could control anything in the low. It could control anything in the high. So we'll just add a basic LFO to this so we can get started. And you'll see that when I go ahead and click this, everything is going to light up. When I go into the low and the tool effect, everything lights up there. When I go into the high, everything lights up here, no matter how far I go. However, if I go into reverb, and let's say I had a wet effect in here. Let's throw the chorus in here. Okay. At this point, what's going to end up happening is when I go and I double click down on this, that controls, if I put something in a modulation spot in the reverb, anything that I can double click and then open back up, it can control, meaning that it will be able to control anything here in the chorus or anything inside of the reverb. If I go and I put a modulation, some kind of modulator inside of the chorus, it can only control things inside of the chorus. And I'll just show you that here quickly so we can see it. So I'll grab an LFO again. I'm really not going to be doing anything with this. I just want you guys to see it. When I click on this, you see that everything turns blue inside of the reverb and inside of the chorus, but nothing in the tremolo, nothing in the rotary, and nothing obviously behind this. So I can't control anything in there. When I go into just the chorus and I add in an LFO, we'll see that now I can only control things inside of the chorus. And that's kind of the basics to how this all works. Now, this is a multiband effect, but what if I wanted to, I don't know, add in some distortion, but I want it to be separate to all of this stuff that's going on in here. I can go and I can grab an FX layer. And now one layer is going to be this multiband effects thing going on. And the other layer is going to be a distortion. You can hear how aggressive that is. And so now, if I go into the multiband effects, remember that this can only control things to the right. What if I want to control the pan here? Where would I have to put my modulator? I couldn't put it inside of the distortion. I'd have to put it into the layer, into this main container, the major container. Because remember, if I double click it, everything goes away, which means if I put something in a modulation spot in here, it can control anything. So we'll go back in. And for just the sake of it, we're just keeping it very simple. I'll let you explore the modulators on your own. I have a whole series on them. Sorry, I have to keep blacking out the screen because my mouse is on the fritz. And really what I'd probably end up doing in this instance would be using two different modulators so that this wasn't totally linked with this guy here. So that's probably what I'd end up doing in that situation. But that's just to give you a very generic and basic idea of how things are working, both in terms of modulators and also in signal flow. Let's do another example with instruments this time. And let's start by adding in a container. And the container I'm going to use is the XY instrument. And with this container, what ends up happening is it crossfades between audio. All right, so it's not going to change parameters. We can set that up very easily using the modulators. But for now, we're just going to set this up. And I am going to have a modulator that's going to go back and forth, but it's only crossfading between the audio. But for now, we'll go into slot A, and we're going to add in an instrument. And we'll add a couple different pad sounds. I like that one okay. So I bring that guy in. Over here on the left, this is showing all of our modulation sources and destinations thus far. Pretty crazy. So let's not look at that for now. We're going to get into that, I think, in the next video. And then in B, we're going to add another polysynth here. And we'll go into presets, and we're going to find another kind of pad. I need to bring that over to the other side so we can actually hear it. Let's add pad windy. I like the way that sounds. I click OK. So I think I'm only going to want to get a little bit of the windy, and I'm going to go and I'm going to add in an LFO here. And again, this is me just keeping it very, very simple. Okay, so that's what I'm going to do, and then I'm going to go and slow it down. And really what we'd probably do is add like a compressor onto this. And so if you're following the logic we were following before, we want to compress it all together, which means we could put the compressor in one of two places. One place would just be at the end of this entire chain, and that's obviously going to affect everything that comes before, which in this case would be XY instrument. Or we can go into the post effects, and I'm just going to, again, close everything down here for now. And we'll bring in our compressor here. I'll actually use the dynamics. And just keep this very simple. But let's say like on layer B, we also want to add in some kind of like bass going underneath. Could we actually do that feasibly? The answer is yeah. Actually, it would make more sense to do it on A, since I think we're prefacing A a little bit more. And the way I would do that is by adding in like an instrument layer. And so I can grab my instrument layer here. I'm putting it on the outside for now, but I'm going to bring it in before this polysynth. Now I'm going to take the polysynth and bring it inside of the instrument layer. Nothing has changed at this point, except now in A, I could add in another instrument down here. So we'll add in the polysynth again. We're going to want some kind of like sustaining bass. And I'm going to solo it at this point. See if we have a bass that sounds interesting. No. one of these softer ones is what I'm looking for. Yep, that's better. And then I'm not sure, depending on this sort of setup you have, I can go a step further here in the note effects, which is only going to control remember, I could actually put a note effect at the very beginning. That would control both of these instruments, but I'm just going to want to have it control the bass, and I want to bring it down an octave. I can do it in different ways, but I'm going to go in here, and in note effects, I'm going to look for the note pitch shifter. I'm going to bring this one down an octave. Hopefully you can hear that. And now you'll listen to the difference if I bring this at the front. Because it's now controlling the dirty dub pad as well, versus just working in the soft bass. I'm probably gonna have to change my settings on that compressor. It's clamping down too aggressively at this point. Interesting. And we could continue to go further and further with this. We could add layers, we could add effects and so forth. But it's important to then remember, okay, where are we actually going to be putting our automation? Or where are we going to be putting in our modulators, I should say. Sorry, not automation. And remember, if I put it in at the instrument layer, I could pretty much control everything with the exception of controlling something out here from the XY instrument, which is why I put it the LFO here. But from this stage, I could control basically everything and anything. So typically what I like to do is I will just keep most of my modulation all the way to the left because I know I can kind of find and grab anything. Sometimes it gets a little complicated though when you're having to like scroll way over and find things, in which case if you know you just want to control like, let's say the sync of this particular instrument, or we'll do it on this dirty dub pad. Let's say we want the sync to be jumping around. I could go into this polysynth here and I could grab something like the steps and I could then send that to the sync. We'll just randomize it. I'm actually going to go in. The other thing I would probably also do is on this soft bass, be to go in here and have this not be mono. So clearly this is where like Bitwig Studio really thrives. And remember, you don't just have to stick to built-in devices. You can also go with any and all sorts of plugins. And so it really opens up a lot of potential. It also can put a strain on your CPU pretty quick, but I just wanted to at least go through a couple of examples so you could really see how flexible and how easy it is to, I think, get sounds and come up with things that nobody else is going to come up with, because it would require them to do so many different steps. This isn't just loading in a preset. We just loaded in a few presets, but then with a few additional adjustments, boom, it sounds totally, totally different.